I am Venom, and you are mine. I am Venom, and you are mine.
So you can hear it's already got a lot of the character of Venom's voice. It just doesn't sound as big. It doesn't sound wet. It doesn't really sound that exotic. Okay, so the first thing we did was we used Little Altar Boy from Sound Toys to just pitch the voice down a little bit, about 2 semitones generally. It varied a little bit depending on Tom's performance, but we played with a whole bunch of different pitch shifters, and there was something about the way this one sounded that suited his voice. The other thing that we liked about Little Altar Boy was we were able to add a little bit of drive, which gave it just a little extra edge.
Fuel in the tank. Listen carefully, Eddie. You did not find us. We found you. Think of yourself as my ride. We need Carlton Drake's rocket.
So you can already hear that by pitching it down, it's already starting to sound a little bit more like Venom right away. After that, we've got a channel strip, which is just doing some very basic sort of containment to the sound. A lot of the recordings from set, he would actually go with the sound recordist after he shot, or before he shot a scene as Eddie Brock. He would go with the sound recordist and record all of his lines as Venom, like in the corner of the soundstage. And then he had a little earwig where they were playing him back the Venom lines in his ear, and he could act against himself by hearing what he'd already recorded.
What are you doing?
I'm putting my hands up.
You are making us look bad.
No, I am not.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not.
Why would you do that?
Because it is a very sensible thing to do.
Eddie?
I will take care of this myself.
Eddie, where's the bug?
A lot of that stuff that was recorded on set was very noisy. And with all the other processing that we were adding, we had to do a little bit of cleanup to help that process. I'm just using a little simple expander gate here to help get rid of some of the noise floor in between the lines. And I'm using a little light compression to help contain the voice because that seemed to help with the processing. And then we've got just a little basic vocal EQ and filter. I'm actually de-emphasizing the bass a little bit before it hits all the other processing because we were adding so much bass that we found it was sort of overloading it if we didn't take it down a little bit to begin with. And then the next one in line is just the classic Avid de-esser. This is just doing a little de-essing to the voice so that it's getting rid of some of the harsher kind of sounds. So if I just isolate this.
Listen carefully, Eddie. You did not find us.
So like on that us,
Find us.
that's the kind of sound that really irritates your ears. Here, let's just go before and after here.
You did not find us. You did not find us. You did not find us. You did not find us.
All we're trying to do in these first couple processors is contain the sound so that as we start adding these more exotic processing to it after this, that we're not going to get loud spikes and things like that. So this is where we start getting more into the fun stuff. We're using the air frequency shifter, and this is basically adding a little tremolo to his voice.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
I'm just going to turn this up so you can hear it, sort of an overemphasized version of it.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
So we're only adding a kind of a kiss of that, about 25% of that.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
And that's one of the things that we're using to give it a little bit of a liquidy kind of feel. It's just up-down frequency variation. That's all it's doing. And with a little bit of feedback, which gives it a little bit of that kind of shimmery quality. And then we've got the effects rack from Sound Toys, which is tons of fun. This is one of my favorite plugins because it's basically like 20 plugins in one plugin. And it's great for when I'm trying to find a cool processing chain for something because you can just quickly throw stuff in there and try things, and it's sort of like a sandbox for me. So you've got your sort of basic stuff up at the top. You can do a dry-wet mix with the whole chain, which is really cool. You can vary the input and the output levels and that sort of thing. Let me turn off everything here so we can kind of go through one by one. So the first thing we're doing is we're adding yet more tremolo, but this is sort of a different kind of tremolo. It's adding a little bit more kind of analog style tremolo, you could call it.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
So again, let me crank this up so you can really hear what it's doing.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
So you hear it's adding a little more grit to his voice. It's chopping up his voice is effectively what it's doing. But by doing that, it makes him sound sort of growlier. And obviously, if you go that high, you can really hear it, and it's harder to understand what he's saying. But if you just use a little bit of it, it adds this extra kind of texture to his voice.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
And then without it,
I am Venom, and you are mine.
so you can hear he sounds a lot smoother without it. Ruben really liked the kind of grit and growl that the tremolo, or it's amplitude modulation. Because the last plugin that we used, the Air Frequency Shifter, this is adding frequency modulation. So it's changing the pitch, right? And this tremolator that we're using is adding amplitude modulation. So it's making it choppy. The next thing we used is the Phase Mistress, which is adding a little bit of sort of a phasey swooshiness to the voice.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
So let's crank that up.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
So this I'm using to add a little bit of sort of exotic alien kind of feel to it. Again, all this stuff, I'm just using 25 to 35% usually, not using a lot of it because I'm just looking for a little more flavor. Anytime I'd go too far with this stuff, it starts to sound processed. And we didn't want it to sound processed, we wanted it to feel organic. That was a big thing for the director, is it should sound like somehow this voice is coming out of his liquid body.
Eyes, lungs, pancreas. So many snacks, so little time.
This is actually one of my favorite parts of the whole thing. This is just adding distortion. So this is basically an analog style tube saturation kind of plugin. And you can see I'm overdriving the input just a little bit, and then I'm overdriving the bass and the treble because I didn't want to just add bass saturation. I also wanted to add some high frequency saturation to give it a little more edge.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
It makes the whole thing feel more aggressive and more just big and nasty. And it also kind of helps with clarity. So let me just overdrive this here and we'll see how crazy it sounds.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
You can get it pretty damn aggressive if you want it to. We decided we wanted it to be a little more, in the pocket. But this is one of many great plugins you can use for that kind of thing. I'm a huge fan of distortion in general. I think distortion is just one of those things that makes things feel larger than life. It makes things feel cinematic. Most of our favorite rock records, at least, are built around distortion. And that's not just the guitars. I mean, the drums, if you listen to Zeppelin, back when everybody was recording on tape, you got a lot of that for free. And now I find that I have to use things like this to add back that edge and that attitude and the vibe. And the good thing is there's all these great plugins now that can do it. So then the next one, this is the Air Ensemble plugin. So this is essentially a chorus and modulation plugin. You can hear I'm adding a lot of layers of modulation. That's a big part of what makes this character sound the way that he does. And part of that is it just gives it that kind of liquidy sound. This particular one is basically it's a stereo chorus, which we're using to sort of spread the mono signal into a stereo, which gives it sort of a larger-than-life kind of sound.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
And then we crank this guy up so you can really hear what it's doing.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
Do you hear all this sort of liquidy stuff in the low end especially? We really liked what this did to the low end. It filled out the low end in this really pleasant way. And then I'm going to pan this to be a little wider so you can really hear the effect of the stereo width. This is something that we use sort of selectively. A lot of times he'd be monoed up and coming out of the same place. And then a lot of times we'd add just a little bit of stereo width to make him feel bigger. And just so you can hear what that sounds like.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
And then without the plugin,
I am Venom, and you are mine.
So the cool thing about this was it gave us the opportunity to give it a stereo width whenever we wanted it. The final couple pieces of the puzzle here is the Pro Multiband. So we're using just a touch of multiband compression on this, much like I was talking about earlier with sound effects, controlling your high frequency level is a really useful thing in movie mixes, especially in all mixes, but especially in movies, because movies get played primarily in big movie theaters with big horn-loaded speakers. They tend to be fairly unforgiving on the high end. So the sounds that get kind of pokey get really pokey when you're in a 500-seat screening room. So I'm using a little bit of multiband compression to rein in a little bit of the high frequencies.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
And you can see it's not working that hard, right? It's only dropping this down. At its worst, it's about 5.7, which it's only on this very first transient.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
Because otherwise, it's only dropping at about 1 to 2 dB. And it's only in these frequency ranges. It's not something you're really going to hear as compression. It's not going to sound squashed. It's just going to sound a little smoother when he gets really loud. If we look at this.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
So that's the only part of the spectrum that's getting affected at all. These lower two bands are just passing through unmessed with. It also has the effect of sort of emphasizing the low end in a natural way and making the sound feel a little rounder. It's only really important because of all the processing that we're doing ahead of this. That's why we needed to just contain it a little bit. One of my favorites, Pro Subharmonic. So I'm using this in a different way than I normally would for sound effects. So normally for sound effects, I'm trying to bring out the low sound, which I'm mostly going to be putting in the subwoofer. In this case, I'm using it in the higher band, and I'm using a very tight bandwidth here. So all I'm doing is trying to pull out just that extra lower octave below what would be a sort of natural human voice, because we wanted Venom to sound bigger than a human, and we wanted him to sound bigger than any human could possibly be. And let me just play you in context here.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
Now this is only what Pro Subharmonic is adding. I like this particular plugin, the Pro Subharmonic, because it tends to sound really tight with the source material. So it feels like it's just an extension of the sound rather than just a rumble track that we're adding on top of it. And one thing that helped with that is using a really tight bandpass here. And then we're also adding a little bit of drive, which helps just, again, you're adding more saturation, you're adding more distortion, but you don't hear it as distortion, you just hear it as bigness. And this is actually not going to the sub. This is going only to the main channels. And that's another way that we're trying to connect the voice with that sub-octave bass rather than disconnecting it to the sub, it's keeping it in the same channel as the main voice. So the final piece of the puzzle is we've just got another channel strip. So this is just sitting here, again, doing essentially some limiting. It's not even doing compression. It's a 10-to-1 ratio, but at a very high threshold. So it's doing just that last little bit of containment on the overall sound.
I am Venom, and you are mine.
So you can see it's hardly working at all, at least on this line. There's some lines in the movie where he's yelling and it needed a little bit more containment. But all these things are basically to help keep it in the pocket of intelligibility. So it sounds big and it sounds loud, but it doesn't sound too loud. And it also doesn't, it evens out the performance so that you can hear every line. We are once again doing a little bit more filtration here just as a way of kind of reining in some of the super low lows and some of the super high highs because they sort of didn't belong. You know what? Let me play you one other little thing. These are these really cool sounds. Tom and Ruben had this idea that Venom would sort of make these weird little gurgly sounds in between his lines. It sort of sounds ridiculous by itself, but you know, we're running it through the same processing chain. So it gets lower and it gets all the same sort of processing that the voice does. It ends up just giving it another sort of weird layer.
I am Venom, and you are mine. I am Venom, and you are mine.
You bit somebody's head off.
The first thing that we did, we basically built a template so that all of the tracks that make up his voice from various takes and even other sounds that Tom would make, like little gurgles and things in his mouth. And those would all feed into a bus, which is just a mono aux, which is processing a whole bunch of different plugins in order. The return of this aux track is bused to two objects. And the reason for that is so at any point, if we wanted to have him, be off the screen a little bit and a little wider, it was just yet another way to make Venom's voice sound different than Eddie's voice and different than the other humans. Because it was, even if it was just 5% wider and 5% in the room, it gave it that kind of larger than life feel. And by leaving it in objects the entire time, it also meant that at any point Kevin could just repan it and widen it up a little bit, or sometimes he would use the size functionality to add a little more size to Venom. So again, Venom would sound bigger and just different than the humans. This was actually the very first task that our director Ruben tasked me with. The first week I was on the movie, he came to me and said, it's really important that we figure out what Venom's voice is going to sound like, it was kind of a bit of a surprise to me because, normally the directors are more interested in, certain sound effects and what things are going to sound like that way. But for him, it felt like the biggest sound design challenge was really trying to figure out how are we going to take Tom Hardy and what he's doing with the voice and turning it into what, sticks to the image of a giant 8-foot-tall alien monster, right? So it was a pretty long R&D process, actually. We went through about 30 different versions with Ruben, where I would put together 5 or 10 different versions of the voice, and he'd come in and we'd listen to them and talk about what we liked about each one. And I would try, anything under the sun to try to figure out how I could twist this voice around and make it sound. He wanted to sound alien. He wanted to sound big, menacing. But of course, he still wanted to be able to hear the acting and hear the character work that Tom was doing. So the key to this whole thing was to not only make it sound really exotic and interesting and cool, but to actually still understand what he was saying. We paid a lot of attention to that as we were building this process. It took us literally 30 tries to get it right. And this is what we've came up with.
You come in here again. In fact, you go anywhere in the city preying on innocent people, and we will find you and eat both your arms and then both of your legs, and then we will eat your face right off your head. Do you understand?
Please.
Yes. So you will be this armless, legless, faceless thing, won't you? Rolling down the street like a turd in the wind. Do you feel me?
What the hell are you?
We are Venom.